Okay, welcome back. We are in Bridge. We're going to pick a JPEG. To open a JPEG in Camera Raw, here's what you don't do. Double click, because that opens up in Photoshop. And that can be a little frustrating if you are trying to get it into Camera Raw. So I'm going to shut that. You can right click, open in Camera Raw, or with the image you want to open selected, go up to the option bar and hit this little guy right here. Open in Camera Raw. And there we go. Now a couple of things that I did not mention last time. You have your shadow clipping warning and your highlight clipping warning. And you can see a little bit of red around here, and that is because our histogram has got a spike. Excuse me, which is a bit of a reflection. So I'm going to start at the top and just work my way down. I can see what auto says. Auto warms it up a little bit, adds some magenta. Yeah, I think it's definitely a little green. I'm okay with that for now. My exposure, let's see if I'm going to bring the overall exposure down a little. Highlights, if we drag them this way, you can see the highlight warning. And if I drag it this way, you can see where the histogram is brought in, and that peak is brought in. Now, it can get gray and kind of dingy looking, so I'm not going to go too far with it, just enough to get rid of it. Shadows, I could open up the shadows a little so you could see some of the detail in here. The whites, I may pop the whites a little bit. I'm going to hit before and after. What I'm essentially trying to do is change my lighting, right? From being entirely backlit to having an area here that is more of a focal point. For the black, if I bring it down too far, I get the blue warning, which means that is going to be pitch black. I can bring it down. I can open it up the other way by dragging it to the right. It reduces the amount of black, and I'm not sure I want to do that. I'll leave it there. I'm going to go to my tonal curve. Medium contrast looks good. It's a little too aggressive. I'm going to go back to linear, bring down the black a little more. So what I'm trying to do is balance out keeping my highlights in here, keeping my detail, but not losing my background. I'm going to also bump the clarity up a little bit. Okay. Now, if I want to do retouching, I can also do just so many other things in here. If I want to do retouching, I would want to go into Photoshop. If I hit Open Image, it opens as a normal image. Meaning I cannot go back into Camera Raw and make any adjustments because I have a locked background layer. And that is not great. All right, so I've lost my workflow. I'm gonna hit Don't Save on that. Go back in here. Hold down the Shift and it changes to Open Object. And it changes to Open Object and it will open in Photoshop as a smart object. And we love smart objects. They're great, right? So no matter what I do, if I want to make a levels layer, if I want to make a retouching layer, maybe get patch tool. Let's zoom up in here a little bit. There's not too much to retouch in here on account of it's just nature, but let's retouch anyway. I want, let's see, patch is content aware, sample all layers. Let's pretend I'm making really important decisions. Okay, let's move this. This thorn is in my side. It's terrible. Okay, so now I have those areas of retouching, a levels layer, and this, my smart object layer. If, like, you know, I think I made it too dark, I can double click on the smart object, go back into Camera Raw, make any adjustments I like. I'm going to make a really aggressive adjustment just so you can see the change. And hit OK. And it updates my smart object. By double clicking on that smart object, I can go back in here and change the crazy.
And what did you do again to do that?
When I originally opened the image, let me finish just this one thought, and then I'm going to show you again. Excuse me. Save changes to this. Save. In this case, you will save it as a smart object, .psd, because it has layers, and you cannot save something as a raw file in Photoshop, so you will save it as a PSD. At any point, however, and I don't know where that file went on account of I didn't pay attention to where it was going. I think it might just be on Walter. Okay. Now, if say my client's like, oh yeah, you know, I'm not quite sure. I think it's just too dark. You could fix that in Photoshop, or I can double click at any time to go back in here and adjust any of my settings. I could make it grayscale in here. You could also do that in black and white adjustment filter. You could do that in here. You could split tone, make it black and white, go in and split tone, which is adding yellow. Say, for example, adding yellow and blue. I usually add blue to the shadows, yellow to the highlights, and it mimics a print that you would make in the darkroom using Selenium and sepia print, and then hit OK, and it will update. There you go. I'm going to hit Save. So if you go into Photoshop from Camera Raw, you want to make sure that you hold down the Shift key. If you don't, it just goes right in. If you open up Camera Raw, see, this is going to be, you have to open up the shadows here. Bring the highlights down. So sometimes it's a little bit of a dance. Okay. I'll pretend it's perfect so that we don't spend a ton of time. Shift changes open image to open object. Go into Photoshop, do whatever you need to do, and when you save it, you will save it as a Photoshop document. All of the special effects that we are going to do, we're going to be starting in Camera Raw and then working into Photoshop. Zoom up here for just a second. So you can see we have an aged paper effect, how to mimic depth of field and areas of focus, how to make a panorama, how to get the HDR look on a single image. If you would like to try making a high dynamic range photograph with 3 exposures, you can. I will bring in exposures for you to experiment with. Vintage film effect. Make it it's a little more high contrast, a little bit some color shifts. See how I did that. High contrast portrait look, because everybody wants to look older. Not quite sure. That's split toning. Right, exactly. And the Lomo effect, which is one of my favorites because you actually add blurring and crazy colors and flares and lighting effects. And you can see I added a bunch of green here. And this is a more of a standard traditional side than a much more wowza side. Some of this was not started in Camera Raw, but we will start in Camera Raw and go right into Photoshop using Smart Objects. All right. And that is all I have to say today.